get to our seats. Can we have the roll call, Joan?
Charles Long,
Here.
Kevin Mitchell, Michael Shaw,
Here.
Priscilla Manuelito, Chris Mortensen.
Here.
Okay. Thank you, Joan. We do have a quorum, and let's begin our meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time.
6:02.
At 6:02. Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, board members, those in the audience, Mike, Joan, assistant superintendents, Kat, Sandra, and Vern, Pete, and our bonds people. Thank you. And of course, Kelly, Kat, thank you for being here. With that, members of the board, we go to item number 2, approval of the agenda. We've had time to review the agenda, I believe. And what is the pleasure of the board?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the agenda.
Okay, motion's been made by Michael Schaaf to approve the agenda. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Okay, we've approved our agenda for our meeting this evening. Let's go down to item number 3, approval of the meeting minutes. Let's approve the meeting minutes of May 21st. That was our regular meeting. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. President, I move that we approve the meeting minutes.
Okay, motion's been made by Chris Mortensen to approve the May 21st, 2018 regular meeting minutes. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Now, the June 4th meeting minutes. This was our special meeting, I believe. It was a regular meeting too, so.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the minutes from that very special meeting on June 4th.
Okay, that's a regular meeting. Motion's been made. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes, thank you, board members. We approved the meeting minutes. Let's go down to item number 4, the approval of the consent agenda items 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D. What is the pleasure of the board?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda items.
Okay, thank you. Motion's been made by Michael Schaaf to approve the consent agenda items. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. We approve our consent agenda items. Let's go down to study circle, public comment. We have one. Kelly Martinson. You're in the driver's seat.
How y'all doing? My name's Kelly Mortensen. My wife came in here at the last school board. We're parents of a senior at Middle College High School, and he's done really well up there. He's got 28.5 credits at a 3.75. He's taken Calc 1, College English 1 and 2, um, economics, computer science, just a bunch of really good, solid college credits. And we're really pleased, but it's not, we're not satisfied and we're not complacent. And this thing between the board and the middle college has disrupted, a senior's path. He does not, he doesn't know what he should do. He hears things, there's things that have been said, and he thinks that he needs to get out of his program where he's been tremendously successful and go somewhere else. I don't know. There are options, but I think that's a result of what's been going on. One other thing that's happened is there was a screenshot of a computer screen that was a memo to principals that said that there's going to be security measures taken this year, necessary security measures, and then it's kind of an odd inclusion that mid-college was excluded from prom and from participating in like sports classes, prom, where they've been allowed in the past. That's a change, and that's kind of a big change. And I watched the last board meeting where, Chris, you questioned the superintendent, and then he says the policy, and then everybody goes, okay, well, that's good. It's not good, and my wife came in to say, she wants him, he came from Miamira, he's at mid-college. He did not go to the prom or homecoming this year, but perhaps he would like to. And this says that he can't. When we asked early, we were told, no, that's the policy. If they want, mid-college can throw their own prom. So I don't know how many students we're talking about. We're not. I guess the reason I'm here is because my wife was cast as someone who's against school safety, pro school shooting, just so her kid can go to prom. And that's not the case at all. And that's probably why I'm here. Just to say when I saw it, I thought, well, it's an oversight that you could easily include that number of people safely. And certainly we don't want to cast them. They are in the district. We wouldn't want to cast them as, I don't know, some kind of harm. But that's how it is. So I guess I'm here it's June, prom is far, far away. We should be able to address that easily. And maybe just, I don't know, through this whole thing, it's like people get labeled. It's like the 2016 election. People get a name, Little Marco or Crooked Hillary or Bad Rob Hunter, Shady Kim Brown. Chris has been called some nice names, and nobody likes that. And I know my wife doesn't like her father was a sheriff's deputy. She is pro-law enforcement. She's pro-school safety. And she's also pro-kids, so she was just trying to, get you guys to fix that. I don't know how we comfort our seniors. And that's another issue about the mid-college charter. Did you guys have any questions for me, or?
No.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mortensen. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate that. There will be a response to your comments. So thank you. That now we go to superintendent's report.
President Long, members of the board, community members, I'm going to give a quick report over several items, and school board members, if you have any questions for me at the end of that, or even during, I appreciate any questions that you might have or comments. Today, we received PARC scores, raw data for our math and English scores. So those went out to all the state of New Mexico. School grades will probably come out in August. That's typically the time frame. But as we've started just barely started to dive into that data. We're seeing some promising gains across the school district, and so we're excited about that, especially in English language arts. So we'll provide more data as things become more concrete, as we're able to kind of data mine into those numbers. Today I reported to the HES committee and Navajo Nation to clear up some misunderstanding and misinformation that was given to them. But in addition to that, I provided a lot of other things that are happening in our school district that are positive, areas we need to improve in also. But one of them is we got some data from Mr. Chavez, our athletic director and hearing director, regarding suspensions and expulsions. And we looked at the data for the last 2 years, and there has been a 61% decrease in expulsions and long-term suspensions from our hearing office over the last 2 years. And I want to talk about that just really quickly and state that we have a different approach in the way we deal with students who are struggling in school. And that's to have a proactive approach instead of a reactive, where students are just kicked out of school and kicked to the wayside, when there are ways in which you can support students, in which you can provide a plan and put that in place so that they can still be a part of the school without any way for them to disrupt the education of other students. And so we're looking at the way we handle our relationships. Our special education department has worked with us on some training to also help us to look at the way we handle discipline in our classrooms and our schools differently. So that's been very positive. We are also, as I mentioned before, incorporating cultural relevance into our curriculum. That will be accomplished by the time school starts for our core areas, and so we're excited about that and appreciate those teams of administrators and teachers who have worked on that. We also were awarded a high school redesign grant from the state of New Mexico, specifically for Mia Mira High School. And this is funding and consultation to help us in our career pathway design and implementation for that specific school. It was selected out of several schools across the state of New Mexico. And in addition to that, that's just one extra help for us as we incorporate career pathways for all high schools and for all schools actually in our district. We also found out this last week that we were awarded some funding, although we don't necessarily need it to support the program. It's also nice to receive extra funding for our new early college program, McKinley Academy. The state of Mexico selected 3 schools or 3 school districts to receive that funding, and so we appreciate that opportunity also. In addition, we found out today that we were kind of, I guess you call it an award. We approached the PSFA to make sure that we had funding in place for extra pre-K classrooms at Lincoln Elementary and Thoreau Elementary. And they awarded us 2 more pre-K classrooms and 1 more, or 2 at Lincoln and 1 more at Thoreau Elementary. And these are in addition to the ones that we already have designed into the building, but they are going to match those classrooms. So we'll pay the 19% and they'll pay the 81% for those classrooms. So that's a good thing. Through elementary, I wanted to mention that we are a little behind on that. It's not on our end. PSFA has been slow in getting documents and responses back to us, and so I expect that that's going to delay us until September for the start of construction, even though we've kind of been promoting that's going to be July. And so I want to apologize that we kind of let that out of the bag for the community when it doesn't seem to be happening until September. So we apologize for that. The abatement of teacherages has begun. We have started in Thoreau. We were out there a couple days ago, and so they are abating those so that we can tear down those eyesores and problem spots for our communities of Thoreau, Crown Point, Tehachapi, and Navajo Pine. And so this summer we'll go through the abatement. As the abatement finishes, we will come through and bulldoze those buildings, and so they're no longer a menace or opportunity for locations of trouble in those communities. We did install bleachers at Navajo Pine High School and Crown Point High School this summer. We're increasingly trying to make sure that we have safe buildings, and then those areas get used heavily, and they were pretty rough bleachers in those 2 school buildings, so we replaced those. A year ago we replaced Tehachapi, I believe. We also, this Wednesday, will be advocating and interviewing to receive more teacher pursuing excellence funding for a couple of our schools in the district who were selected to move on to the next phase. And so Gerald Harasik and I and a team of administrators will be going to meet in Santa Fe to basically interview with the PED and see if we can get that funding for our school district. I'll give you another update later next month, July 23rd. This year, I think we have more partnerships with the public education department than we've ever had, and we still have a few more to see if we're going to receive. And so we're very fortunate that we have this extra funding to help support our efforts. It's not just funding, it's also partnership in implementing best practices in our school. A couple last items. We do have, I mentioned school grading before, there is going to be a change to school grading for next year. I'm actually going to be in Albuquerque this Friday to talk about school grading. They're trying again to raise the proficiency scores for the state of New Mexico. And so really they're kind of going back in my perspective as to No Child Left Behind, where they value proficiency more than growth. And I think that's detrimental, because when students come into our schools, the expectation is that they grow, not that they're just proficient. What if they're highly proficient and they drop and they're still proficient? That's still a problem. You want your students to continually grow. And I think that as we go there and we listen and as we participate, we're going to continually advocate to move more towards the growth model. And that's all I have this evening.
You, Mike, questions, comments, board members?
Mr. Hyatt, I have a quick question for you about, I know it wasn't part of your report this week, but it was from last week when we talked about the school safety.
Mm-hmm.
Under the new policy, would a student, say from Thoreau High School, be allowed to attend prom at Miyamura High School?
That would be up to the discretion of the Miyamura principal.
Okay.
So inside the district of students that we have oversight over, we will allow that upon the principal's discretion. But any student who is not in a position where we oversee them as a part of our school district will not be allowed. It doesn't have to be a student either. It could be a graduate. It could be a student from anywhere in the country. We are going to exclude them from our non-public events.
What about your college boyfriend?
No, they will not be allowed to come back. Graduates, any student from any school, it's not specific to Middle College, and the letter even states that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hyatt.
Other questions? Nada? Just want to say thank you, Mike, for the bleachers in Crown Point. Now people don't have to worry about splinters in their behind
That is true.
during basketball games and all that, so thank you for that. Now I guess it's to the old teachers. It'd be good, to get rid of those eyesores. I know community's been complaining about that in Crown Point for years, so thank you, Mike. With that, board reports, board members?
Nothing to report at this time.
I don't have anything to report either, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity, though.
Okay, thank you. Under reports, notices and communication, you can read that for yourself. Leadership retreat, New Mexico School Board Association, July 13 and 14. I think that's going to be a good retreat to go to. Before we get to old business, I'd like to give the floor to RBC Capital Markets and talk about the bond issues.
Did you want to do old business scope of work?
I understand you have a long way to travel, that's why.
Okay.
And I know it's very hard to travel in a hot weather. So I don't want your horse to throw a shoe or something like that, or you run out of water or something like that. So give you the floor.
Okay, Mr. Long, President Long, members of the board, I'm going to start by actually having Ms. Hanks come up, and she's going to introduce RBC, but I want her to also introduce this particular action item so that you are fully aware of what will be taking place this evening.
Okay, Giovanna.
President Long, members of the board, Superintendent Hyatt, members of the audience. This evening we are very lucky to have two members with us this evening. One is Evan Kiss from RBC Capital Markets. The other is Art Melendres. And these two individuals have helped represent the district for many years and given us lots of good advice regarding the sale of bonds and our continuing bond practices. Each of you have received a finance plan and a bond sale update. The school district is looking to go out in August for $6.5 million. These will be directed at the construction of Thoreau Elementary. They will also be directed at new turf fields at Rama High School and Gallup High School. And in addition to that, it will be a new HVAC system for Cheatodge Elementary. And it is important, just because of the timeline of the sale of the bonds and the board meetings that we're looking at, that we do get this started now, because we are hoping to sell those bonds around August the 4th. So in that, I would like to introduce Evan to come up and give you a brief overview.
Thank you. Mr. President, Superintendent, members of the board, a short presentation here that's hopefully everyone's received a copy of it. I'm not going to go through every page, but kind of briefly go through some of the more important pages, and please stop me at any time if you have any questions, and happy to answer anything either about the sale or the process or anything that might be in this book. And again, I'm with RBC Capital Markets, the municipal advisor to the district. So turning to this first page in the presentation, this is the debt management plan for the district. And in 2011, the district held an election to authorize $25 million in bonds. And also in that year, the district issued $6.9 million in new debt. And so currently right now, before the issuance of the $6.5 million, the district has $18.1 million in authorization in place. And again, in August, the district plans to sell $6.5 million through a private placement with the New Mexico Finance Authority. And this is similar to a transaction that the district entered into for the $6.9 million that it sold last year or privately placed with the New Mexico Finance Authority. There's a few other important points on this management plan, and these are all things that we take into consideration as we plan not only this issue but future issuances for the district. Although this is a private placement and not needed, the district does maintain a Moody's rating of A1. And there was some, if the district were to ever sell bonds competitively in the public markets, and we run this comparison every year in consultation with staff, look at the various options of what might provide a better funding cost or lower borrowing cost to the district. A public rating is important. The state of New Mexico is selling severance tax bonds competitively tomorrow, and as a result they've been downgraded by Moody's, and this doesn't affect the district, but as a result they've downgraded the New Mexico School District Enhancement Program from a AA2 to a AA3. And where that's important, again, not for this particular transaction, is if the district were to ever sell competitively in the market, the district has an underlying rating of A1, but gets the higher rating and the benefit of the New Mexico School District Enhancement Program, which now is rated AA3 by Moody's as of today. So, not applicable for this, but something important to kind of have in the back of your mind going forward and for a future debt planning issue. So, going back down, the tax rate, in conversations with staff and over the many years, we continue to plan on a flat tax rate, a tax rate that does not change, a debt service tax rate of 8.32. And that has been, there's another page in here with a history of tax rates, which shows that it's been very consistent, and we've planned to maintain that same tax rate into the foreseeable future. So with this issuance, it would stay exactly the same at 8.32. So in the bottom right quadrant on this debt management page, you see the 2017 assessed valuation for the district was $845 million. district has the ability to bond up to 6% of that AV, which would be about 51 million. Currently, before the August 1st payment, district has $46 million in outstanding debt, and so that leaves a debt capacity of $4.5 million, where the district is about 90% bonded capacity. After the August 1st debt service payment, I think that percentage drops down to about 76%. So still foreseeable capacity for the future. Next page, on page 2, just outlines a 5-year history of assessed valuation for the district, and there's a 5-year and 10-year average growth rate for the assessed valuation, which is basically the same, 2.2%. And for planning purposes, for our purposes, and in consultation with the staff, we actually have a 1% growth rate, and we use very high interest rates in the debt plan, so very conservative from many different perspectives. That helps us kind of manage assessed valuation fluctuates from year to year, kind of helps us better manage that process. Following page, page 3, is this history of tax rates that I mentioned before, and it is it's the 5th column over GeoBond tax rate of 8.32. As you can see, that's been fairly consistent over the last 5 years, and we plan to keep that the same for the foreseeable future. Page 4 is the proposed time schedule for this upcoming financing. And as Giovanna had mentioned, we plan to privately place or set the rates with the New Mexico Finance Authority the week of August 6th. And backing up one more step, the district's NMFA application will be go before the NMFA board on July 26th, and at that time they will approve that application, set the rates on August 6th, and then on August 24th, as we have it on the schedule, you will close that financing, and then that those monies will be available to be requisitioned from the Finance Authority. And with that, happy to stop and pause for questions, or conclude my presentation and hand it over to Art Melendres, who's bond counsel who works for the Module Sperling Law Firm.
Question, board members?
I appreciate you coming out today, thank you. Can you tell us what kind of interest rate we'll pay and what kind of interest rate people will earn?
So the interest rates through the New Mexico Finance Authority are publicly available on their website, and they update those every week. And as of the last run of these numbers, I believe I have it in front of me here, but the interest rate should basically be in the close to about 3%.
That's what will be charged?
Yes,
Okay.
through the New Mexico Finance Authority. So the New Mexico Finance Authority is a highly rated entity of the state, and if they continue to maintain high ratings and get good rates in the market, which they do, then that is a benefit to all districts kind of throughout the state who borrow through them. So last time I looked, and rates do fluctuate up and down, and as everyone reads in the paper and sees, the Fed just recently hiked rates again, and there should be a plan to hike at least 2 more times before the end of 2018. That does put upward pressure on rates, Treasury, tax exempt, but currently right now I'd imagine it would be a borrowing rate of about 3%.
Will those be fixed, or are they variable? Or how
Those are fixed rates. Yep. So you lock those in on the week of August 6th and pay those through the life of the transaction, but there's a different rate for every single maturity.
Is there anything that we can do to get a better rate?
Good question. And so We constantly look for kind of the different funding options available to the district, whether that's a private placement with a bank, could be a local bank, or oh, sorry. Like a local bank or a bank in New Mexico, look to the Finance Authority, and then also look at what the public competitive market might offer. And so given recent changes in tax law, placing debt with a commercial bank is not very cost effective right now, because they just don't get the tax benefits that they once got, with basically their tax rate going from 35% to 21%. So they're not really an aggressive buyer of tax exempt debt in general. So kind of leaves the two other options: the competitive offering in the market, or through the New Mexico Finance Authority. So through the New Mexico Finance Authority, they always offer very competitive rates, and at least this year and right now, kind of handily beat the public markets. There's also many other benefits through issuing through the New Mexico Finance Authority. District doesn't have to go through the cost, time, and effort of putting together a bond rating presentation. Also doesn't have to put out a public document, a preliminary offering statement, and then also have a kind of official statement. So there's a lot of cost savings outside the actual borrowing cost of the transaction. And again, in terms of the lowest funding cost currently right now, and we'll continue to monitor that, but I think it'll bear out through the end of the year that New Mexico Finance Authority will be the lowest borrowing cost option for the district.
Great, thank you.
And just to briefly, this is something that's going to continue to come up, especially as we discuss our audit. There's new reporting rules that will be applied. Some were applied last year regarding liabilities in relationship to educational retirement. Some will be coming on this year in regards to educational retiree health care. You will see throughout the state of New Mexico, many of us are having to pull more of these liabilities onto our books for reporting purposes, and it's because of the unfunded liability that we have in our retirement programs. And so some of those are being taken into consideration, and that's why we're seeing kind of downgrading across the state. So in discussion with Evan and his team, it is most advantageous for us to look at New Mexico Finance Authority at this time.
Are we in a good, tier of interest rates relative to other schools in the state, or schools at least of our size?
I would say it varies because many other school districts are not as heavily bonded as we are. Given that only 20% of our land is taxable, we hover near bonded capacity at all times, which is at that 96%. I know Evan mentioned that after our first bond payment in August, we'll be down near the 70s, and then we'll go right back out for that $6.5 million and kind of get right back up there. And it's just because the only way for us to continue to progress and provide appropriate facilities for our students is to bond and continue to build, and with the state's support, make appropriate for all of our students' facilities.
If I could add, just we've talked about this before, but I want to keep saying it publicly because it's a part of our lawsuit, in that the property-rich, you'll see a trend across the state of New Mexico with property-rich districts are not bonded to capacity, where we have to be bonded to capacity to get by, and we're still not getting as many funds. Even with the state match, we cannot construct buildings and facilities to the level that property-rich districts are able to, even with them not being bonded to capacity. So this is a sore spot for our school district.
And just briefly, that's why I do say it is hard to compare us, just because many of those other districts really have the option of bonding, where we do it to our absolute capacity. It is a necessity for us to continue the bonding.
And that was an excellent point, and thank you for bringing about Moody's. Yeah, Moody's has continued to downgrade districts across the state who are either rating surveillance, meaning that they go through a rating process even if they're not publicly issuing debt, and also other districts that are going out to issue debt in the competitive markets. So Moody's has downgraded not only districts but also cities throughout New Mexico, city of Albuquerque, Albuquerque Public Schools, Alamogordo Schools, basically been a part of many different bond ratings this year, and I think about 80% of cities, counties, school districts have been downgraded by Moody's. They're taking a very aggressive stance on kind of what's going on at the state level through ERB and PARA. But getting back to your original question, doesn't matter whether it's APS, Alamogordo Schools, Gallup. If you borrow through the New Mexico Finance Authority, you're all going to receive the same. If everybody borrowed on the same day, you would receive exactly the same rates, and you had the same principal amortization, everything. You'd get the same funding costs.
Any other questions? Nada, huh? Thank you, Evan. I know you mentioned bond election 2011, and here says 2017. Is that what you said?
I'm sorry, maybe I misspoke, but yes, in 2017,
Okay,
the district had gone out for a $25
Okay.
million bond election.
thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Javon?
And also here with us tonight, Art Melendres with Module Sperling. Art is an exceptional bond counsel. He gives us amazing advice anytime we reach out to him. We're very lucky that he's here with us tonight. And he's going to speak to you briefly regarding the steps that are going to be necessary for us to actually get the bond sale accomplished in August.
Good evening. Always good to be here, and thank you for a wonderful supper. What I'm here to do is update you really on the process that is going to occur. So the first thing that Giovanna and Evan mentioned is that you're going to go through the New Mexico Finance Authority. In order to do that, the Finance Authority requires that an application for a loan be submitted to them. And I think that paperwork you have in front of you, and all that would require is, I believe, a signature from the president. And then we will make sure that the application is submitted to the Finance Authority. That will kick in motion the process. Evan's already explained to you the dates and what's going to happen. What I'm here to do is ask you to pass a resolution which is called a Notice of Sale and Delegation of Authority. And that document, I believe, is on your computer. You've had it given to you by Giovanna. And this document sets out for the public especially notice that the board, the district, are going to borrow money, $6.5 million, and that is going to occur on August the 9th. The New Mexico legislature passed a law a couple years ago which permits the board to delegate to the superintendent the authority to sign a bond purchase agreement, the agreement between the Finance Authority and the district. And this is important. The legislature recognized this, that, and especially in the summertime, sometimes in the depth of winter, board meetings get canceled, they get changed. And so this gives flexibility to the district to get bonds purchased on the right date with the right interest rate. So also in this document is what is called a parameters resolution, and it sets out parameters for the sale of the bonds, and this is what the board says. This is on page 5 of that document. The board says if the bonds are offered and we agree to purchase them within these parameters, which is a 12-year maturity schedule, an effective interest rate below 5%, and that we have a bond form embedded in there, then the superintendent can sign and the Finance Authority will flow the funds. I want to point out that if there is one of these conditions that is not, or excuse me, if there is a condition not within the parameters, then the superintendent and we would be back before the board to explain what the difference is and get your permission or authority to go forward or stop. And so I want to assure you that this document contains all of the information that's required by New Mexico law to have a notice of sale and to authorize the delegation of authority. This will be published in the newspaper, and in this way, the community will know that you are about to sell bonds. And importantly, if someone were grumpy, I'll say, frustrated, there is a legal way for them to bring that to the court's attention and pull us up short. But it's important that we give notice, and then there's a statute of limitations also. If there's no effort to stop the sale of the bonds, they become final. And with that, back to Giovanna, if you want to make to the superintendent for a recommendation. Appreciate a motion to approve.
Sure, Mr. Long, members of the board, Superintendent Hyatt, these are two separate items on your board packet this evening. So we will need a vote on each. I am recommending that we approve these so that we can continue the progress that we've made in the construction and renovation of our facilities district throughout the district. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Giovanna. Under new business, Business A, approved the application to sell Gallup McKinley County School District General Obligation Bonds to New Mexico Financial Authority in the amount of $6.5 million. What is the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make a motion to approve item 7A, approve the application to sell these GMCS general obligation bonds to New Mexico Financial Authority in the amount of $6.5 million.
Okay. Chris Martinson made a motion. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Martinson?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes. Okay. Now we go to 7B, approval of the notice of sale and delegation of authority for $6.5 million Series 2018 General Obligation Bonds. What is the pleasure of the board?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the notice of sale and delegation of authority for 6.5 million Series 2018 General Obligation Bonds.
Motion's been made by Michael Schaaf. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Martinson?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes. So we got that approved.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, make sure you grab something to go. We won't eat all of that, you know, so a lot of food back there. And those in the audience, you're welcome to whatever's back there. Otherwise, the three of us, we're going to end up eating all of that, and I don't think we're about ready to eat all that food.
Vern might have to take it home with him.
Yeah, so put some in your shoes, whatever, pockets. Okay, now let's, board members, let's go back to old business. Approval of scope of work for lobbyists. I believe we got copies of the scope of work that was drafted by Giovanna. I don't know if there's any questions.
President Long, members of the board, if I could just add, I did not receive any items to add or to be considered for the scope of work. And so I believe, unless Ms. Hanks has some other information that I don't have, that this is the same scope of work that was presented last meeting.
Ms. Hanks, I have a couple of things that I think it might make sense to at least talk to my fellow board members about adding to the scope. I think it's important that whoever, you know, from a scope of work standpoint, we need somebody that is going to help us, you know, we could put a line item in here, help us to build a stronger relationship with the Navajo Nation and with some of the other Native American tribes and pueblos in our areas. We share common interests with them, and I think it's important that that's a part of the scope of work to help us build build a coalition with these folks. I think that's something important to add in here. I would also like to see, not necessarily in the scope of work, but maybe in the RFP under disclosures. I think it's important for anybody that's turning in a quote or a proposal that they disclose any contributions or donations that they've made to anybody on the school board, both who and how much for and things like that, just in full disclosure and transparency. And then looking through the other contract that we have, I mean, it looks like we have 90 days if we're going to terminate with our current contract. I mean, it looks like we have 90 days to do so. How would the timing of this work? Would we need to terminate the contract with them so that we can move forward with whoever may be the current contract holders at the end of this, so we would have the flexibility? I mean, I don't want to get a month or two down the road and we have gone through this whole process and then we have to wait an additional 90 days before we can sign with whatever the whoever the new lobbyist is.
President Long, Mr. Mortensen, Mr. Schaaf, Superintendent Hyatt, what we could do is modify some of the language in here to include, I know that we've directed some of the language at the New Mexico State legislative system. We could modify some of that language to include the Navajo Nation, as well as chapter representation. As far as
Excuse me, I'm
Sure.
sorry. Beyond representing us with those entities, we need our lobbyists' help to help us build a coalition with those entities, to represent all of our interests with the state of New Mexico.
President Long, Mr. Mortensen, so are you stating that you would like, as a part of the scope of work, somebody that has experience doing that? Not necessarily tribal entities, but entities in general? Or are you asking for specific either experience or willingness, are you saying, to work with the tribal entities?
Both. I mean, it's important that they have experience, but it's really important that they have a willingness to go out and help us to build these relationships.
Ms. Hanks, would we need language at this particular time that the board would craft before we can approve, or because if not, then we'd bring this back in July? So.
Correct. I would recommend that if you would like that language inserted, we would discuss that. The contribution to campaigns, there is public information available on that currently, so we could we could go ahead and review all of that information that's currently available, because lobbyists are required to disclose any campaign contributions, how much and to whom. So that is publicly available information. We could definitely do that research on anyone who came forward wishing to provide a quote. And I believe there was a third inquiry there.
That's all.
I think that
That's all I
covered it.
Yeah.
I don't know if my request is necessarily, worth going back to the drawing board on this. I just want to make sure that, that's, included in the, the spirit of what we're asking, is that we're asking these folks in the scope of work. It's obvious we're asking them to help us build relationships with legislators in Santa Fe, but it's also equally important that they help us build relationships with legislators, with some of our neighboring tribes. I don't necessarily think we need to go back to the drawing board. I think we probably can approve the scope of work with a couple little tweaks like that.
I think a good example on getting coalition going, like let's say with the Navajo Nation, is Impact 8. I know we as a school district and school board, we tried to go at it alone, and I think it would be good for the Navajo Nation to support us with amicus briefs or whatever.
That's pretty much. I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I mean, it'd be easy to add and tribal leaders to almost any of these lines.
And absolutely, I could make that amendment to any line where it references legislators.
Great. And you can supply us with those types of disclosures that we were talking about it in, I guess, more of a consolidated format as we get responses to the RFPs.
Yes, and if any board member would like to email Mr. Hyatt and had any interest, that information is available online. It is required for disclosure for lobbyists, so you can actually pull that information up online.
Perfect, thank you.
So let me make sure that I'm clear on this so that the action is correct. Mr. Long, Mr. Mortensen, I think would it be easier for us all just to go through the bullet and see where you would want that entered? Because I'm looking through the bullets of the scope of work. I could easily see that being added to the second bullet about arranging meetings, et cetera, between Gallup McKinley County Schools and key legislators. We could include
Anywhere it says
tribal-
key legislators or state
Okay.
legislators or anything like that, I mean, I think it's important to include tribal legislators in there as well.
Okay. So I would suggest that if the motion is made, that it's made to include tribal entities or tribal governments in all areas of the scope of work that includes legislators.
Perfect.
And would the board be okay with the language of officers? That way, regardless of what level that individual was within the Navajo Nation, because I'm sure that they do have various titles throughout various entities, to keep it as generic as possible so that we could work with as many people as possible.
Perfect, yeah, I think that's flexible enough.
That should work. Yeah.
Mr. President, I'd like to motion we approve item 6A, approval of scope of work for lobbyist, with the changes that we've discussed.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Motion's been made by Chris Mortensen to approve the scope of work for the lobbyists with the tweaks that were recommended. Roll call, Joe?
Mr. Mortensen?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
President Long, members of the board, we're gonna keep Ms. Hanks at the microphone for a little while longer.
Okay.
The next item has to do with increasing our emergency fund. It was a year ago, I think I think the first time in a decade or more, actually added $2 million to an emergency fund, kind of like a rainy day fund. It can be looked at that way. And this year, we want to continually look for opportunities to increase that, and that's what this particular item is for. And we mentioned that last meeting. So, thanks.
Mr. Long, members of the board, Superintendent Hyatt, members of the audience, we currently have $2.5 million in our emergency reserve policy. We are proposing that we raise this another $500,000 to make it a $3 million emergency reserve. The state of New Mexico does allow us up to a 5%. There are a considerable amount of restrictions on actually expending these funds, so we are increasing it at a conservative pace. We all know that our funding is variable based upon the will of the legislature and the federal budget appropriations through impact aid, so we do like to approach these things cautiously. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those, but this is moving us towards that threshold of the 5% of our operating budget for emergency reserve.
Ms. Hanks, what types of things can these emergency funds be used for?
So on the executive summary, there's actually 3 bullet points, and we would need to meet all 3 of these in order to withdraw these funds from the emergency reserve. It would require both approval of the Board of Education as well as approval of the state. And we have put in there a significant drop in the unit value would be one of those conditions. Not receiving impact aid funds as initially anticipated, or a significant decrease in impact aid funds could also trigger the pulling of these emergency supplemental funds.
How far can you stretch this money if we get in a bind?
It would depend upon the severity of the event. The district does try to be very conservative in our budgeting, and we've learned through many years of fluctuating funding both at the federal and state level. We do try to create opportunities to where we are not in a situation where we're going to have to make some very drastic decisions in a short period of time. I believe many of you have seen the newspaper articles that came out about that many years ago, where the district was faced with some tough decisions in a very short period of time. We do try very hard to keep in contact with the Impact Aid Office in Washington, D.C., so that we are not surprised by any changes. We watch the legislative changes at the federal level and appropriations at the federal level, as well as monitor the revenue reports that come out of Santa Fe.
Any other questions, board members?
I'm okay, Mr. President, thank you.
I think it's always good to have a reserve. That comes in handy.
Mr. President, I motion that we approve the modification of the emergency funds, increasing the emergency fund by $500,000 as we've talked about.
Okay. Motion's been made by Chris Mortensen. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes. Thank you, board members. We go to new business D.
President Long, members of the board, as you know, we have in years past gone out to secure revenue bonds in order to pay for teacherage units in our county schools. And each year we have to make a multi-million-dollar payment for that payment for that bond. And so that was what this item is specifically for. Giovanna can stand for questions if you have any questions about why we need to do this as far as transferring funds in order to meet that revenue bond payment.
Giovanna?
President Long, members of the board, Superintendent Hyatt, we will eventually pay off our revenue bonds. Our last one will come due in 2026. Hopefully you are still all hanging out with me here at board meetings. We currently, as of the end of this year, will owe $15 million and some change. On the remainder of these, the district, when they sold these, pledged operational funds as well as any revenue received from the rental of the teacherage units. Those two funding sources actually become the permanent cash transfer that goes from general funds and teacherage funds down into debt service to make the August 1st and February 1st payments that are due each year for principal and interest.
Questions, board members?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the permanent cash transfers to transfer funds from operational and teacherage to the Special Revenue Debt Service Fund.
Okay, motion's been made by Michael Schaaf. A roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes. Thank you, board members. We go to 7E.
President Long, Ms. Hanks is also going to address this particular one, but each year we have to provide an inventory on all fixed assets, and so this is a yearly annual thing. And so if you have any questions or Giovanna wants to make any more comments, we'll give the time to her.
Ms. Hanks, you've got the most fun part of the agenda. It's right up there with dinner.
I promise this is my last one.
This inventory, it takes a long time, I'd assume. Are things bar-coded, or how do you do it?
Mr. Long, Mr. Mortensen, members of the board, Superintendent Hyatt, yes, we do have an electronic barcode scanning system. Each one of the handheld devices is distributed out to school sites, and they scan. Anytime an item is determined as obsolete, which is part of the surplus, we'll bring it back here. We will present it to the board before it's actually destroyed, and we'll also seek approval from the state attorney and the state auditor's office. And it is quite a process in order to get everything looked at in the system. And it's a good way, though, a very, very good way to make sure that we're monitoring the assets that the district has purchased for our students.
Do you have to do an annual inventory, or can you do like cycle counts throughout the year?
It is an annual inventory that is required by state statute.
Are you allowed to have a yard sale or something with the old stuff? I mean, you said destroyed. I mean, there's a lot of folks that probably could use some of the stuff, I'm guessing.
So with a lot of the things, unfortunately, by the time the school district is done with them, they are usually quite old and quite often obsolete, if not broken, unfortunately. So we do try as much as possible, if we get a new school and another school can utilize the items that are coming from the school that is being replaced, we try to redistribute those items equitably around to other schools. But usually, especially our technology, has very much reached the end of its life by the time we actually obsolete it.
The vehicles, are those traded in?
So the vehicles, we are seeking to do a surplus sale, and I believe we're going to do them as a lot this year. Yeah, we do indeed do surplus sales once we receive approval. In the past, we have done those just through individuals turning in bids for the items. Because we were able to replace a substantial amount of our fleet last year, and it's because we had so many vehicles that were so very old. They were kind of very much at the end of their lives, and they were costing a lot more to maintain than it would be to replace them in the long term. We are looking likely to sell those as a lot.
Great, thank you. Mr. President, I motion that we approve item 6E, the approval of the written inventory as required by the New Mexico Administrative Code.
Okay, motion's been made by Chris Mortensen. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Thank you, Board.
Thank you, board members. Yeah, let's go down to 7F, Title III Local Plan.
President Long, members of the board, I'm going to invite up Sandy Freeland, and she is a coordinator within our cultural ed department. She oversees Title III, and she'll give you a brief description of what you have before you in regards to our Title III application.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, board members, guests, and district personnel. The Title III application requires a board signature, and so I believe, Mr. Long, you have the original. And I don't know if you have any questions in regards to your application. If not, I can do a highlight of what's been new this year in terms of the application itself.
I don't have any specific questions, but I certainly would like to hear if there's any new things on the application this year.
Well, what is new is the actual format. The state has web EPS form where everything's uploaded in Excel format. This year, with the new bilingual language culture department changing from bilingual multicultural, they upload it in a SharePoint format, which is a drop down. And they pre-populated the budget. And this year the federal government cut a lot of the federal funds. And so we were not immune to that. We also had a decrease in funds from last year, but it was all populated. And so we basically subtract from what was already populated into the SharePoint file. So that's a logistical difference. We also engaged with the ESSA, the new law, not really new, but the implementation of ESSA required collaboration with stakeholders. And so our private schools in the past would receive a call if they wanted to participate or not. But the state this year hired or assigned an ombudsman to oversee the civil rights and the regulations for the federal programs. And so Title III is one of the programs that they oversee. And so we had to do physical contact and create a district policy. So that's the attachment to your packet at the back. So we have a written protocol for our stakeholders' collaboration. And I went and visited all of them and found that in that drop down that they had, 2 schools listed do not exist anymore. And so we had to share that with them, that they're no longer in existence. And then also, we are obligated to serve and identify our program plan for who are now considered long-term English learners. They're LTELs, and they're long-term ELs after 5 years without exiting proficiency on access tests that the state has contracted with us, with all districts. And so that's the other demographic data that I have for you, because most of those would impact secondary schools once they leave elementary, unless a child was a repeat in elementary, conceivably could be a 5-year in 5th grade. But the demographic data there is showing you the number of percentage, and that will impact the school report card coming up in 1920. So we want to prepare and have a plan of action on how to serve these students. And so in partnership with our curriculum department and other departments, we're working on that plan, but it helps to see the data. We see the park data as well as other data, but how often do you see the EL population data? So now we have the numbers and the performance data. I share it with superintendent, which would be forthcoming perhaps in July, that the board needs to know. And part of the ESSA is that the board is informed about the English Learner Action Plan by the district, and that it's part of the expectations for inclusion into the core instruction. So those are kind of in one long breath, the new implementation of civil rights governance in the ESSA.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion, if there's, unless there's questions, make a motion that we approve
Okay.
the Title III local plan.
Okay. Motion's been made by Chris Mortensen. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes. Okay, we approve the local plan, Title III.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Sandra, Kat, and Jonah. Now we go to 7G, approve the 2018-19 operational budget.
President Long, members of the board, as you recall, last board meeting, we duplicated this particular item for this meeting in hopes that we wouldn't need it, but we do. And so we're lucky that Giovanna has some foresight and saw that this was coming. We had the special education IDA application from the state of New Mexico that came in extremely late. We have had a lot of trouble with PED in getting things out in a timely manner this year. And we have addressed our concerns along with other superintendents in other districts to the public education department. And so fortunately we do have the IDA application that's available now for approval. This specific application addresses the district's proposal for meeting the needs of students with disabilities in preschool through 12th grade, including private schools within the Gallup McKinley County Schools area boundaries. And so the plan actually outlines, and it was emailed to you because it did come in late. I do have a copy here. If you don't have a copy in your packet, I know I didn't have one in mine, but if you don't have a copy, I have a copy for you to review as needed. And it outlines the plan for expenditures and staffing, as well as the continued efforts to align and ensure the needs of students in Tier 3 are met in each district school location. And so again, I'm not going to apologize on behalf of the Public Education Department, but this is an item that unfortunately we couldn't get to you in a timely manner for the last meeting.
Mr. Hyatt, so we're talking about just an amended operational budget, is that correct?
Right. This falls within the scope of the original approval. It's just that it did come later, and so really you are approving the IDA application underneath the action item of the overall budget.
Any other questions? Giovanna, you got?
No, I will stand for questions if there are any.
Okay.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the budget.
Okay, motion's been made by Michael Schaaf to approve the 2018-19 operational budget. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes. Thank you, board members. I believe that that concludes our business. What is the pleasure of the board?
I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay, motion's been made for adjournment by Michael Schaaf. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mortensen?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
7:11.
7:11, we're adjourned. Thank you so much. Staff, Shakwana, Ndo, Thank you. Pete, thank you.